that well. I feel like we might be able to do a little bit better. And more importantly, I think we really suffer from a tyranny of low expectations. Men are 30% more likely than women to get that first very critical promotion to manager. That sets us on the path to leadership. And I think there's a misunderstanding out there that, you know, women rise and rise and rise and then they don't get that top job in the end. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that the paths for men and women are splitting, and they're splitting early. It's in the business interest of our country and our companies for people to think about this. Study after study, result after result shows us what we already know, which is when you use the full talents of the population, you get better results. This means that every company that can hire, retain, and use the full talents, hear the voices of women, is going to outperform its peers.
That was Facebook Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg speaking at a Wall Street Journal event. We now want to steer the conversation towards women in the workplace. And Jennifer, let me start with you, because the numbers from leanin.org show that women hold less than 30% of roles in senior management. First of all, why is that? And what do you think can be done to change that?
Well, I think it's interesting. I did a little math over the weekend, and in the top 5 positions of Fortune 500 companies, we actually are represented in less than 15%. And in terms of CEOs, we are less than 5%. And it actually goes across government as well. Men also not only rule the workplace, they rule the government. In Congress, mayors of major cities, Supreme Court justices, we are 50% of the population, and we are underrepresented everywhere. The women of our generation, the Gen X women, you know, we didn't encounter this bias, this discrimination that maybe our parents did. But what we are seeing now is what's called secondary bias. And Sheryl Sandberg talks about this. It is an unconscious bias. It's a bias that even Sheryl Sandberg talks about, I believe, in that speech, giving a speech about this to Facebook. She said at the end of her speech, "I'll take 2 more questions." And the questions were asked. The women put down their hands, the men kept their hands up, and she kept asking the questions. And she realized this after the fact, that even Sheryl Sandberg has unconscious bias. So what do we need to do to get beyond this? I think we need to recognize it. I think the women in Gen X need to embrace the parental leave that we have. The men need to embrace the parental leave that they're afforded. We need to be talking about normalizing work-life balance. And I think the millennials should be fighting for more parental leave, because at some point you're going to be having kids. And it's our job to take the time, and it's our job to talk about it and start leveling the playing field. 71% of mothers are now working outside the home, and we don't have workplace policies in place to support the new terrain.
Millennials, what do you think about that? Zara, you nodded your head just now.
Well, I completely agree. I think we definitely need more parental leave, more child care policies. Even before a child is born, I definitely think we need more help with abortions and help with that sort of choice that's made there. And we've all just sort of read the new policy, which is that Planned Parenthood can keep its funding as long as it gets rid of its abortion sort of aspect. So I think that making sure that, from womb to whatever, to getting back into your job, there should be complete support from the government and from businesses.
Complete support for yourself, though. That's the whole side of it. And I agree that we need more women in power, and it's not the same as it was. Women, my mother's generation could be a nurse or a teacher, and that was all their options. Now you do have both people in the home working, and we're adjusting. I agree, we're going through a societal change. But let's not underplay how wonderful it is to be a mother, and what a great job that is to raise children and to be able to pass that along. And I think, unfortunately, so many times this conversation is not focusing on how wonderful it is to have a mother and a father, but it's still the mother there within the home being active as well within our children's lives. I agree we need more support for it, but let's not continue. And sometimes I think women at home who are staying at home feel like they're the ones being insulted by saying that it's not a great enough job for them to be at home raising their kids as well. well.
I don't think that there's necessarily a connection, right? Like giving women in the workplace ample rights and the ability to do their work isn't necessarily negating motherhood either. They're not mutually exclusive to one another. And honestly, this type of inequality for women exists in many industries, in many fields. I'm a newly published author. I'm a first-time author. And one study that I read about in the time leading up to the publication of my book was one conducted on over 700 book reviews in mainstream publications. And this study found that a fraction of those book reviews were written about books written by women. And then of those numbers, only 3 were written by women that looked like me. So especially we have to talk about, I think, what women of color have to endure. Because for women of color, leaning in the workplace isn't enough. For women of color, there are so many more barriers to even get into the room to lean in the first place. They have to kick down doors. They have to really just jump through windows, jump through hoops to be able to get to certain places. And I think that is often neglected from the conversation. And even now, I think under the current administration, that's something that seems to be empowered even more.
But do you really want a job just because you're a female or you have some sort of demographic? I don't want that. I don't ever want a job because I want it because I am the best person qualified for that job based on my resume, based on my activity, that a boss wants me for that job, not because I'm a female and they just need to fill that affirmative action slash. I'm afraid that's where we're moving with on this conversation. Like, oh, she got it because she was a female. No, I got it because I'm the best person for this job. And I fear that's where our conversations are now going, where people are going, oh, okay, I'm just going to check off I got my female box, unless we are a little bit better with that.
Sometimes the person who is the best for the job isn't even in the room to get interviewed in the first place. So it's not about giving a pass to people.
You can't necessarily say that. I think
I'm
you don't
saying
have
it now more than ever.
Discrimination. You don't have that kind of discrimination going on.
Of course,
male versus female.
There is structural inequality like that.
To back it up. There is research to back it up. But I also think there are a lot of women who don't have the option to stay home. So what about the majority
of it that goes with it?
The majority of women don't actually have don't have the option to stay home.
Whether or not you have the option to stay at home or not, why is it upon the government to provide resources such as paid leave? Why is it not upon your business that you're working for to talk to them?
It hasn't been mandated.
We don't need universal health care or universal paid leave. What we need is to have real serious conversations with businesses. And when you put barriers on such as universal paid leave, you're actually having problems with businesses that are going above and beyond the set minimums with our government.
Let's turn to another issue, because this notion obviously of child care and staying at home versus working outside the home is one we could talk about forever, really. It's a debate that's been going on, but I want to turn to equal pay, because Jennifer, we've seen people advocating for equal pay for years, but at the same time, do you think there is really the potential for that issue of equal pay to rise to the level of being the top of the national priority list or discourse?
I mean, I think it's one of the equal pay issue in and of itself is very controversial, right? It's been. Some studies have debunked it. There is an issue. There is a discrepancy. I'm glad you didn't quote the numbers that are often now debunked. It is an issue. I think it's one of a myriad of issues, though. I mean, I think equal pay, when we don't have women in positions of power deciding how much we're paying, this is the result of it. And again, I'm not looking at men who are in the positions of power as the enemy. I think they are. I think we need to embrace them and bring them into the feminist movement. I mean, this is not something women can do on their own. Obviously, we have men in the government making these decisions. We have men at the top of the corporate ladders making these decisions. We need to come together and stop telling men to check their privilege at the door in a dismissive way. I think there's a better way of having these conversations with men.
What do you think about that, Nina?
Well, also people like to leave out the fact that women of color they face the most gender gap or wage gap based on gender. That's my train of thought. But also, it's the fact that people do debunk it, though, and they do debunk the fact that, like you were saying, women of color sometimes don't even get the foot in the door. Because they see, oh, it's a really ethnic name on the resume, so they just toss it aside because, oh, well, if it's going to be some crazy name, like they like to say, it doesn't sound professional, So that's another huge problem here.
Nina, what about what Jennifer brought up, the notion that you need to have allies? Obviously, you need to have men on your side. Do you see this being something that, for instance, in your generation, that millennials are talking about things like this in a more open way, direct way?
Definitely. Definitely, because I mean, you saw men at the marches too. It wasn't just a women's march; it was an everyone march. And especially with my generation, we're definitely changing, you know, the social scripts that come with gender, that come with acting a lady or acting like a man. We're definitely changing the way we talk about it, and even, you know, the fluidity that many people see with gender and sexuality.
Let's turn to the topic of education, because this is something that's been such a key issue, really important issue, and one that President Trump has made it a point to mention. Let's go ahead and take a listen to some recent comments from the president.
As I've often said in my address to Congress and just about any place else I can speak, education is the civil rights issue of our time. And it's why I've asked Congress to support a school choice bill, and we've come a long way. I think we're really we're right out there, and we're ahead of schedule in so many ways when it comes to education. And again, Betsy's going to lead that. You're going to lead that charge, right? You're going to do a fantastic job.
Ashley, let me start with you. You are a supporter of school choice. Tell me why.
I am a proponent of school choice. I serve in D.C. government on the Board of Education, and yet I believe that we should embrace school choice because it empowers parents. It empowers parents to make the best decisions for their children, whether that's traditional public school, charter schools, homeschooling, religious schooling, or online schooling. We embrace them all. Those are all choices, and no, all children don't learn in a one-size-fits-all box. We want to embrace parents, and we want to embrace families to make the best choices for their children.
Jenny, what do you think about that?
Well, you know, this is an issue that we could like
Talk
all
about
the other
for
issues
hours.
we could talk about for hours. I mean, I think you know, obviously the risks are taking resources out of public education. I mean, I do believe in parent choice, but I also it's a slippery slope.
I think this is an olive branch issue. I think this is one of those issues that we can find a good foundation to build unity on between Republican and Democrats. I think majority, even teachers can agree, Common Core right now has some major issues where the focus is on teaching a test rather than teaching life. I think there's a lot of, I think this is one of the issues why President Trump did better in demographics he was expected to do bad on. Because Hillary Clinton, I think, did not go into the areas of the Hispanics community or the urban areas and talk about education, if it more focused on splitting, and rather than what her plan was for educating and putting money back into those local school programs. I think it's secondary to the Pentagon and to the Department of Defense. Education was probably one of the most important positions that President Trump had to pick one of his members for.
When you look at school choice, oftentimes the charter school and school choice movements in cities have been started by parents of African American or Latino who have Latino families, because the traditional public schools were failing. They were low performing, and that's why we have seen an uptick and an embrace of school choice methods. When you took a look at budgetary issues and taking money away from traditional public education, the opposite end of the coin is, shouldn't the money follow the child as opposed to dumping money into more school public traditional schools? If the money follows the child, you can have the best education.
All right. Well,
I mean, what children is the money following? Because in a situation like this, it's really just, Democrats and Republicans can come together on this, but it is the most privileged Democrats and Republicans that can come together on this. I think that it truly neglects underprivileged families. It neglects people who are on the lower income side of things. It absolutely does deplete resources from children who don't have a choice, that have to attend public school, that can't afford to go to a charter school. And of course, yes, that means that charter schools are going to perform better. Of course that means that. Like, there are public schools in inner cities that have horrible, that are just horrible for children, but we're not putting resources into those schools. We're instead taking resources away from them even more and really just making education even more exclusionary. And I think that is really such a shame.
Well, we'll see if, in fact, folks in Washington manage to find some common ground over this issue.